Hello and welcome back to the Librarian of the Rings. Today we're going to be talking about my feelings about Rings of Power Episode 8. These are kind of my initial reactions. Welcome back. My name is Ben, I'm the Librarian, and today we're going to talk about Rings of Power Episode 8 and specifically my reactions to it. Now, I've only watched the episode once so far, and I just have to say that the word I keep coming back to after this episode is dissatisfied. I feel dissatisfied with this episode and by extension kind of the entire season of Rings of Power Season 2 because I just didn't feel like they did what they probably could have done. And there are some points that just really didn't sit right with me. Now, if you've been watching this channel, you know that I try and keep an open mind around Rings of Power, as well as all Tolkien adaptation that's coming out, and try and look at it for what it's trying to do and what value it brings to the Tolkien fandom. And I try and be respectful of all of the creators who put in their hard work to adapting Tolkien into different mediums. Because the truth is, most of them are really big fans of Tolkien's work, just like I am, and they're doing their best from the way that they're seeing it to adapt his work. And I think that is definitely true of the showrunners of Rings of Power and many of the people working on it. Many of them love Tolkien, they have a deep knowledge of his lore, they've read a lot of his works, and they want to be able to bring more of his stories to the screen, and I appreciate that. And so even though I'm dissatisfied, I don't want to be disrespectful of the work that others have done, and I think that too much of that goes on the internet. So as I express my dissatisfaction, I want to do so in a respectful way while still being honest about how I feel about it.
This is for posterity, so be honest. How do you feel?
There's really two main points where I left episode 8 feeling dissatisfied. One is there are some lore points that I think were not done correctly and they could have been done correctly. There wasn't really a reason to not, and that left me feeling like, oh, I don't really know if I love the story that's being told here on screen. And then there was a lot of choppiness to the story. I think there's been some scenes that were left out, or maybe they weren't shot to begin with and they should have been shot, but there were some big jumps and it felt like we were kind of rushing to the end of the season when we didn't really need to. We had 8 episodes to get here. They aren't constrained to any particular time limit as far as I know because this is a streaming show and they seem flexible on how many minutes are in each episode. So I don't really know why we couldn't kind of have a clear path to the semi-resolutions of the story. Of course, we don't expect to have resolutions to the story in season 2 of 5. We expect for the resolution to come at the end. And of course, we all know how the stories end anyways. But we did want some kind of ending to this season where the storylines kind of resolve. And it would have been nice if that resolution had come as a result of kind of logical progression more than just like these great jumps. Now again, I haven't sat down and watched all episodes 1 through 8 back to back, and maybe there is more resolution than I think if I come back and watch it that way, but most people are just watching each episode once a week, and if I'm feeling dissatisfied, there's a good chance a lot of other people are too. So let's talk about this. First off, I want to get the big one out of the way, and that is the lore one around Gandalf. So the stranger is revealed as Gandalf.
Gandalf.
Surprising no one. They have been pretty transparent while still being obscure about this. They have not revealed his name up until this point because they wanted it to be this plot point of him getting his name. And so it's not surprising to us that he's Gandalf, but it is dissatisfying that he's Gandalf. And we already kind of knew this going into it. If he became Gandalf, a lot of fans were going to be dissatisfied with this explanation. And where this comes from for me is I don't like it when they change the lore into exactly the opposite of what the lore says. If they need to kind of mold the lore a little bit to take their story where it needs to be, I'm okay with that. If they fill in gaps in the lore, of which there are many, then I'm okay with that too, because you can have different interpretations of how the gaps are filled. It's when they take something from the books and they do exactly the opposite of it that it frustrates me. This is what happened with the Hobbits. When they took the stores and they made them hole dwellers when it was supposed to be the Harfoots who were hole dwellers, that doesn't sit right with me when they say, oh, let's take this point and let's go with the exact opposite of it. And that's what I feel like has happened with Gandalf. Gandalf says in the books, to the east I go not. And in the show, they were like, send him to the east. That's his whole mission, is to go to the east. It's like, wow, now you're going to have to do some kind of weird finagling to like give Gandalf amnesia again when he started with amnesia at the beginning of this show in order for him to ever be able to deliver the line, to the east I go not. So it just didn't make any sense, because if the story they're trying to tell is this story about wizards and they needed 2 of them, they already had two good blank slate candidates.
Then there are the two blue wizards. I've quite forgotten their names.
That they could have used, and many people on the internet have talked about how they are telling a blue wizard story in the East. The blue wizards are basically blank slates except for a few ideas that Tolkien had, which are sometimes in conflict with each other, but a lot of those ideas are being incorporated into this storyline. And so for them to then decide to make it Gandalf really just seems like kind of the worst kind of fan service, the kind of fan service that makes fans upset and only appeals to kind of fans with the least amount of knowledge, which would be like fans who've watched the movies and they just want to see a reoccurring character in it. It feels a lot like when they brought the White Witch into Prince Caspian for not really any other reason except that they wanted to be able to use the same characters in the promo material, so they needed a scene with the White Witch so that they could do that and fans would go, oh, this is the same series. In this case, it doesn't even make sense because they've gone 2 seasons without revealing his name as Gandalf, and so it doesn't even play that role of being like, oh, we've connected the stories together. By making this change, they've brought Gandalf into Middle-earth on a meteorite instead of on a ship, which they're eventually going to have to get Gandalf and Círdan together so that Círdan can give Gandalf the ring, which should happen in the Third Age. And so it just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense with Gandalf's character. It doesn't play correctly in my mind with that, and they had a viable other option that they could have gone with. Also, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to even be using the name Gandalf yet, but that's just kind of where we are now. So if we continue watching The Rings of Power, I guess we have to accept now for sure that this guy is Gandalf. Speaking of this storyline, this interaction between Gandalf now and Tom Bombadil, I think would also have made more sense if it wasn't Gandalf. Gandalf in the Lord of the Rings books actually says at the end that he's going to go visit with Bombadil. And he doesn't really give any indication that they're old friends, and specifically not that they have a mentor-mentee relationship, which they have built up in this show. And so when he talks about going to see Tom Bombadil, he says that Tom Bombadil has been a moss gatherer and he, Gandalf, has been a rolling stone. And so they haven't had a lot of interaction or time to talk. And so now he's going to go and talk with him. And this show seems to fly in the face of that and show that Gandalf and Tom Bombadil have had lots of time to talk. They've spent a good amount of time together. And Tom Bombadil also appears to be a rolling stone, just moving about when he needs to, which is strange. So those are the points where it just doesn't sit right with me, when they just decide to go in the completely opposite direction. Another point in the story for this would be King Durin. There's been a lot of debate about the Dwarven rings and their fast corrupting influence. That's a time compression thing that doesn't sit super well with me, but I understand that they're compressing time in the show. That's part of the story they're telling in the medium, so that could be okay. But this waking up of the Balrog right now at the end of season 2 is odd, I would say, depending on what storyline they're going to tell, because either we're to believe that King Durin's jumping assault on the Balrog somehow had some impact on it, which it doesn't seem like it possibly could, and that's going to injure him in such a way that we are able to continue seeing the dwarves live in Khazad-dûm and work there and everything be fine for a while, and then we have another Balrog resurgence at the end. I don't know, but it's just too early for the Balrog to be here, unless the Balrog basically is able to drive them out in season 3, and then we have this whole homeless story of the dwarves, which is a real storyline in Tolkien. It's just really early for it to be happening right now. That's one of those things where it's like, it does seem like they're going kind of in the opposite direction of where they should be. We're calling this guy Durin's Bane. Durin is trying to kill him, but obviously he's going to be able to kill Durin. He can overpower him. And it just doesn't seem like this whole thing was kind of thought out. It was more like, man, we should have a Balrog. And I hate to say that because I think in some ways the showrunners have been really, really thoughtful. And they do have a really deep understanding of Tolkien's lore. And so I know that when they are making these changes, they're making them consciously. It's not like they didn't know when the Balrog came out and they just threw him in wherever they wanted to. They definitely knew, and they're making these choices because they want to accomplish something in particular with them. So we'll have to see where that one goes. I don't know exactly. Now, as far as things being really choppy here, I want to return to the Gandalf storyline. It just didn't feel like there was any flow to it at all. It was like, man, we need to finish this up. So we take Gandalf from this dead forest where Tom Bombadil left him, and he has to make this Luke Skywalker choice between going after his friends or finding his staff.
I can't keep the vision out of my head. They're my friends. I gotta help them.
And we don't know what he did. We have no moment of decision from him. We just have him show up in the Storrs village and face down in with the Dark Wizard. We don't know kind of how or why that happened, and I would have liked to see a little bit more flow. Maybe just a scene of him looking, making the decision, and going, just to give us something to kind of hang on to. But all of a sudden, we're here. The stores all seem to be under the domination of the masked men, which we did not get a reveal from. So I'm hoping we get a reveal from them in season 3, because we still don't know why they're masked or what's going on with them or why they look like Tusken Raiders. There's a lot of Star Wars plots actually in this particular storyline. Not sure why that's happening. Anyway, we have this showdown between the Dark Wizard and the stranger. We see the Dark Wizard flippantly sacrifice his own henchmen, and we see him use a lot of Saruman tactics to try and convince the stranger to come with him. The whole thing felt choppy. It was a strange resolution to their storyline to not have more build up to this and then not have more kind of battle magic sequence. I would have been totally fine if it wasn't like a big action sequence, but to just have them kind of like dump this load of rocks and the stranger stop it, it all felt kind of disconnected and not a steady flow to a conclusion, which I would like to see in the story. Now that is probably an editing thing. Somehow they must have felt constrained to the amount of time that they had, and there must have been something cut out of this. This continues on after he defeats the Dark Wizard or the Dark Wizard leaves or whatever has happened there, because all of a sudden the stores are packing up and leaving. I'm assuming that their village has been destroyed, and so they feel the need to leave, and Poppy and Nori are going to lead them to meet up with the Harfoots. They're going to do some migration. Nori actually uses that word to talk about it. And obviously they're leading up to them establishing the Shire. That's where they are leading this story to. But it didn't make a whole lot of sense. We needed some scene that connected that for us, that said like, oh, the village is destroyed, now we need to leave. Or, oh, the Dark Wizard is still out there, we don't want to be under his domination anymore, now we need to leave. But we didn't get it. They just decided they had to leave, and the stranger is apparently staying there for an unknown reason. Oh, sorry, I called him the stranger again. What I meant to say was Gandalf is staying there for some unknown reason. There are some other choppy bits in this story as well. For example, Arondir, who was apparently mortally wounded at the end of the last episode, and now is just totally fine. He can come into battle. Everything is good. We don't know how he got healed. If they were going to have that, then it would have been nice if we would have at least seen Gil-galad or Elrond healing him. They have the rings. They have the power. That would have at least made sense, but we didn't see that. Just Arondir's there, and maybe there was a scene. Again, it feels like there was a scene cut out, but somehow Arondir, he's totally fine. He can come into the heat of battle and keep fighting, because that's his role in the story. We don't know why else he's here, except to do some awesome elf moves, which he didn't even do that many of in this episode. But again, it was just weird and strange. Then in the Numenor storyline, we also have some huge jumps. We left Numenor with everybody chanting for Queen Muriel, and all of a sudden, it's like we didn't even get some of this political intrigue where our Farazan has to kind of gain power again or anything like that. He's just like, hey, I have a piece of paper that says Muriel was totally siding with Sauron, and now we're going to round up all the faithful. It's just too big of a jump from point to point for me. It's hard for me to follow these logical leaps. Now, we know that they were going to get there eventually, but why jump there now? We still have 3 seasons, and we could definitely have 1 season that's just building up the political intrigue in Numenor. Weird and jumpy. And then, of course, we get our least favorite character in the show, which is Kemen, who just rolls into Pelargir. We don't know why. Was there a scene that I missed where our Farazan is like, hey, I'm sending you to Pelargir so that you can go and take it over and totally ruin everyone's relationship with Middle-earth? This is something that does happen in the books. Numenor ruins their relationship with their colonies in Middle-earth. But it's just happening like right now, all of a sudden. It's weird that they just jumped right to that. We needed just a little bit more build-up. And then as Kemen's sailing in, we get Isildur just getting ready to go, as though he's like, man, it's time for that Numenorian sea bus to come pick me up, just on schedule. Like, how does he know they're coming? Why is he getting packed and prepared? Why is he saying goodbye to everyone? It's just choppy storytelling, again, because we haven't seen Isildur or Theo, this storyline at all, for a couple of episodes now. And so all of a sudden we're jumping in. It's like, time for me to go. And we don't know why. We don't know how he's informed about this. We don't know what's happening. I guess he saw them sailing in and said, oh, that's my ships. Guess they came back to get me. Hard to say. But I am glad to see that we're finally going to get Isildur back into Numenor, because he's got some really important work to do there, which I hope actually happens. Kind of has to happen. But I keep thinking that, and then they can make changes all they want. Then we have the Orc storyline, which also has this really choppy moment where Glug and his team come in to take out Sauron, and Sauron somehow convinces them to betray Adar. Now, I'm not shocked that Sauron convinced them to betray Adar. What I am not understanding is how he did it. I just needed a little bit more of that scene. Not just him asking what Glug's name was, but him actually convincing Glug, who is already kind of on the fence about Adar, that he's a better option. Because the whole reason that they were fighting was to not be with Sauron. So we just needed more. Gloog's character, it seems like they wanted to build him up, but they just didn't build him up enough. One shot of him having a family isn't enough for us to give us an emotional attachment to him, and it isn't enough for us to understand why he would betray Adar in favor of Sauron, when their whole point was to kill Sauron. And so that just felt choppy. It just felt like, oh man, we want to have this betrayal scene, and we're not quite sure how to get there, so we're going to have it happen off camera. And those are kind of the ones that stuck out to me after this first watching. I didn't do a scene-by-scene analysis to kind of figure everything out. I'm just giving you my overall impressions of being dissatisfied with this episode. Maybe on a second rewatch, it will seem better. I will go through, I will rewatch it in closer proximity, all the episodes together, so that maybe I can have more of a through storyline and understand better what they're trying to do here. Again, I appreciate all of the work and effort that many Tolkien fans have put into this show, and I appreciate that there are more Tolkien things coming out, because I think that ultimately all that can do is lead more people into Tolkien's world. And I hope that that's what it does for you. If you haven't read some of Tolkien's wider legendarium, going beyond the Lord of the Rings into the Silmarillion or Unfinished Tales, then I hope that this will encourage you to do so that you can understand more about what is actually said there about these storylines. And again, Tolkien's stories themselves are choppy. They're unfinished. That's why one of the books is called Unfinished Tales. And so there are changes that have to be made for an adaptation like this. Not everything can be perfect, and it will never align completely with what is in our mind, because we've had to fill in the gaps in our mind ourselves, and now we're seeing somebody else's creation of that. So let's continue to be respectful, even if we don't like everything that they're doing. Now, I would love to hear from you. Go ahead, drop in the comments. Let me know what you thought about episode 8 of The Rings of Power. As always, on a controversial subject like this, I will moderate all comments going in there, so please be respectful, avoid using swear words, and being rude to individuals either who work on the show or who are also commenting below. And that brings us to the conclusion of this video. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, farewell wherever ye fare. May your ears receive you at your journey's end.